Hi, welcome to the Coaching Leader Podcast. Today we have Reverend Dr. Richard Armstrong with us, and we're recording it as well, so you can find it on YouTube. How you doing, Rick?
I'm good today. Got my 9 holes of golf in and ready to go.
All right. And you're, just so that people know, this is like the last day in January, and you live in Orlando.
Yeah, I do. So not rubbing it in on anybody, but
I understand.
it was cold. Morning golf was 58 degrees when I started off. That was cold, but I weathered it.
I tell people, if you let me rub it in when it's warm here and cold there, then you can rub it in when it's hurricane season.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, we wanted to talk today a little bit about the whole subject of finishing well. And it seems to me like that's a great subject to talk about, not only for ministry leaders like pastors, but people in the corporate world who are resigning or retiring, people who are transferring to new jobs, people who are even in maybe volunteer positions who are leaders and they're transitioning away from their position. So what's important for us to know about finishing well, Rick?
My experience in that, and my experience is not only in the fact that I finished, moved out of some congregations and organizations, but also helping others do the same thing. For me, it is really about, it's important for the leader that's leaving to, I think, is to at least help the organization plan, at least think about intentionally their present and their future. Because I think that what's going to continue on after the leader leaves is that organization being intentional and helping them think through it without him or her necessarily leading that. So future, I think, is real important, and present. I think the new leader needs to, the leaving leader needs to make sure that they take the time to inform the new leader. Where are the skeletons? What are the things that need to be known?
Yeah.
As the leaving leader leads, what are the things that leaving leader has known that maybe not others have known, that he or she can share with the new leader, so that secrets aren't kept and secrets aren't tried to be buried there, I think is the way to think of that. And the leaving leader, I think it's real important to finish well, is the leaving leader needs to be intentionally focusing on his or her future and separating that from the organization that they have been leading. That I think it's important for that leaving leader, as they are transitioning, to make sure that they are taking some good time to focus on where they're going and what that's going to look like, so that they can leave where they have been.
And that's tough, because if your identity is wrapped up in your position and what you've been doing for however many years, boy, the whole idea of leaving that position and, maybe you'll be have this vacuum of who am I and what am I really about? I'm not making a difference. I'm not adding value to anything, or so they might think. Is that where you're coming from?
Exactly. That's one of the reasons why I encourage folks who are leaving to do that. That's one of the things that I learned along the way that was important for me as I was leaving, that I needed to make sure that I was taking the time to be focusing on my future, not just the organization's future that I'm leaving. And in fact, I felt that it was more and more going to be necessary for me to focus more and more on my future and let go of the future of the organization that I was leaving. And I think a way to do that is to focus on your future.
And I'm a little bit concerned about one thing there. if you're focusing on your future and leaving where you are, is there a temptation to kind of, I hate to use this expression, but kind of get short timer's disease and say, well, I'm done here, so I don't have to put in the work, or, I can coast, or uh, is there that temptation too? I would imagine there is.
Well, there could be, I think. And to me, that I think if that's what is starting to happen, I think there's some parts of that that's okay, because they don't want to be really wrapped up in the future of the organization that they're leaving. They need to, need to complete the contract. They need to continue to do what they signed on to do for that transitional period of time. But I think what can keep them out of the weeds of trying to influence the future in the leaving organization is to get focused on where you're headed. And I think it's important that leadership, the leadership that is staying in that organization where the leader is leaving, I don't think it's all bad for them to expect the fact that the leader that's leaving, it may not be putting in all the hours that they were putting in before, because it's important for them to step away and move away. And the more they do that, the more they can allow the structure, whatever that's going to be in that interim time, or with the new leader coming in, that can open up the gaps for those people to fill in and the transition to be made. So,
Yes. So I'm imagining not a laziness
no.
from listening to you, but more of a intentional handing off or delegating or empowering others in pieces that you have had, or blessing others to do some things or take charge of some things so that you can let it go in a responsible way. Is that the picture you're trying to paint?
Yeah, and maybe what's real important in that, and maybe this is more helpful to say that, I think it's important for the leaving leader to say, over the period of time, depending upon how long that time is going to be, from the time they've decided and announced they're leaving to the time they leave, overall, they need to be saying, here's some things I'm going to stop doing, and who's going to pick that up, and here's some more things that I'm going to stop doing, and who's going to pick that up, so that there's a void that's created that has to be picked up. And there's not this battle continuing to go on with those who are waiting to take over in some of those areas, and the leaving leader won't let go.
Yeah.
So I think it's real important, as that leaving leader focuses on their future, and as they're letting go of some tasks that they've been doing, they need to let it be known that I'm not doing these anymore. Here's a void somebody's going to have to pick up. Yeah.
And not in a irresponsible kind of way that is maybe smug or short, or I just don't care anymore, and so I'm going to drop this.
No.
But in a helpful way.
Right. And part of that probably does involve, once the decision is made that the person is leaving, it is going to be real important for whoever the coordinating group is in the congregation or the organization. There is a contract that needs to be formed. How long are you staying, and what are the things that you're still going to do? And so there's a real contract that's formed in that, so that it's just real clear with everybody what's that going to look like between now and then.
Oh, I hadn't even thought of that. So are you talking a verbal contract? I've accepted this call, I'm leaving, or I'm retiring, whatever the case may be. And so you work through it with the coordinating body, the committee or council or board, an oral contract of this is what we want to agree to and expect? Or are you talking even going so far as to write things down?
Oh, I guess what I'm thinking, I think it's best to be written, and so that maybe whenever it is the announcement's made that I'm taking this call, then there's a meeting of, maybe it's the president, the head elder, and I don't know, somebody on staff that's continuing, and that here, what's this going to look like? I'm going to stay on for another month. What's that going to look like? And so it's written down in the notes of that meeting where that's agreed upon.
Yeah.
And I strongly believe that one of the things that need to be in there is there may be a time where those folks say, we want to hear from you, Pastor, your idea, or we want to hear from you, Director, your ideas right now, what it could look like for this organization in the next 3 to 5 years. And at that point, you could share that in that meeting. But after that's done, I really believe that the pastor, the executive director, whatever the title is, the person that's leaving, that person has no business being involved in any more meetings in regards to the future of that organization. The future does not any longer belong to that person.
Wow. Yeah. So you're talking about a formalized exit interview where you're just being real upfront.
Mm-hmm.
This is what not only the dollars and cents, pay, vacation days, so that everybody knows, everybody's clear, but you're talking about mining whatever wisdom that leaving leader has about their impressions about the organization, their concerns, their future that they might see. And then after that meeting concludes, that's it. I've kind of said my piece then. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that it becomes also real clear. Here's the things that I'm going to continue to do. Here's the things that I believe or they believe I need to start transitioning off. And who do I transition that off to? And so that's agreed upon in that setting. And then we live that out for that next month. And
that's really helpful. So what are some other keys, do you think, to finishing well? And maybe even what are some things that can sidetrack that?
Well, I do believe it is finishing well. It is about encouraging the future and the new leadership, whoever that is. I do believe it is about asking the question. Not only am I going to say as the leaving leader, here's what I can do, but I think it's also important that I say, what can I help with? What do you need? And maybe there's a period of time that the new permanent leader is not going to be there before I leave, but it can be understood that if that new leader wants to, call or whatever, or meet and ask question, I'm willing to help with that transition. And I think it's important to make sure you hand it all off. Again, don't hang on to things that I'm just going to wait and let them discover that on their own, or I'm not going to tell them about this and this. They're just going to have to find it themselves. I don't think that's right. I mean, what you're going to share is your opinion by and large. They can accept your opinion or not. But again, having your own future to focus on. And I do believe what's really important in that is once you leave, you stay away for a period of time. In a congregation that is, you don't come back to worship. You don't come back for just because you hear so-and-so is preaching or whatever. No, you need to be away for a period of time. And if there is something that really feels like you really want to be there or should be there, the funeral of a significant person or something, I believe it's really important to let the new leader know that's what you would like, and make sure that you be careful with how you obey during that period of time or something.
So you're upfront with the new person, and you just kind of handle it like adults. I heard so-and-so died. I wondered if I would like to just be there and honor the family, thank God for this person, and sit in the congregation and wanted to check in with you about that.
Right. Yeah. And I think it can be, I don't know that it's necessarily asking permission. Maybe it's permission, or at least it's informing.
Yeah.
And so that can be there, and informing with, if you've got any comments or desires about that, let me know. and that kind of thing. So what could sidetrack all of that? I'm really believing what can sidetrack that. Number one is one's ego, and one's ego and one's desire or plan for their own legacy, and that I and I think that that's where one really finds out how much of my value was invested in this place, how much of my what I'm really about, my purpose in life was invested here, and maybe even seeing has it been reinvested in a new place, or is my whole value just overly invested in organizations and their success? And I really believe it's important for leaders to clearly understand that my value is in Christ. My value is not in what does or doesn't go on in this church.
Yeah.
And as that can sidetrack leaving and transitions, man, it can sidetrack ministry if you're staying too. So.
So how does that ego show up? I'm thinking things like you're emailing the board, you're emailing significant people, whining about certain things that you've heard, or throwing your 2 cents in, trying to manipulate things from the sidelines. You're taking phone calls from people who are complaining about the new leader. I don't know. What things can you think of as concrete ways the ego shows up?
Oh, you took 3 or 4 of them from my list already. Yeah,
Okay.
the times of, and I think back to work that I've done. I even think back to maybe some of the temptations I had or did as I left. I think of pastors who take phone calls or emails from former members concerning changes, and so they really encourage those members along their position, which was his position or whatever, and instead of encouraging them to stay in the process with the new leaders and all of that. I think it's accepting offers to do weddings or baptisms without checking with the new leader or those who are heading up that and the ministry that you have left. Some of those take place not on site, some weddings or even baptisms or even funerals.
Yeah.
And so people can say, we're not doing it at the church. So Pastor, you ought to feel free to come and do it because we want you to. Well, yeah, but you're jumping back into a role that doesn't belong to you anymore.
Yeah.
I think you need to check with the new leader and get your ego out of the way. Continuing to worship there when the new pastor has come or whatever, continuing to show your face around the office if you don't work there anymore, but you want to just kind of drop by and check on my old friends, in whatever organization you're doing. I don't think you can do that. Go ahead. Yeah.
And so what you're saying, that seems to me that as part of that exit interview, there needs to be a wider communication to the organization that this is what I will do and what I am unable to or won't do. Mm-hmm. And that presumes that you'll be communicating it. In the case of a pastor, my email, will be less available. My phone for texting and whatnot will be less available. Baptisms and weddings will be under the responsibility of the new pastor and not me. So you're being clear with everybody. So when you do have to say no, it's not so much of a slap in the face, but it's like, well, she's keeping true to their word.
Yeah. And yeah, so I think that's a good idea that in that exit interview or whatever that is covered, and you as the leaving leader commit yourself to that is what you're doing.
Yeah.
And then it comes time whenever the phone calls come in or whatever that it's difficult, but I think it's important to do that. And I think that also is some indications then, if I'm having a hard time doing that, and I've left this congregation 6-8 months ago, why am I having a hard time doing that? Have I really invested myself in the new place? Yeah, I might be going through some struggles and transition, and it's different in the new place, but I can't go jumping back to, well, let's use the biblical picture. I can't go jumping back to Egypt
Yeah.
while I wander in the promised land. I mean, while I wander in the wilderness.
Right.
I can't, it was real important for those folks to understand that they needed to leave Egypt. And that was not geographical, that was emotional primarily and spiritual. They needed to leave and allow God to lead them into the new normal that he has in mind for us. And that can be the battle sometimes in those early months as you get tugged back to the old place.
Mm-hmm.
That can especially be the battle is if the new place is retirement. And so you haven't moved into a new congregation or a new organization. You're now trying to live out an identity that doesn't have you as strongly connected to the pastoral office.
Yeah, yeah. So that recently, I guess you could say, happened with you as you transitioned from the director of Lutheran Counseling Services to retirement. So what was your experience with that? What surprised you? What comforted you, and so forth?
Well, I think that as I was stepping down, one of the things that I was real aware of that I was looking forward to and did take place, there was this relief, this massive let go of schedule, and this massive number of tasks going on that just kind of went away to somebody else's plate. And so there was that relief in schedule that was going to take place. There was that tasks that were going to decrease. There was intentionally, there was a change in role, and that my role was no longer going to be to lead and direct that organization. My role, they have asked me, and will still do, to stay on and see clients a few days a week because of the connections and experience and everything and all. And so I am doing that, but it was a real clear piece that the role changed, and that and one of the things that we did in order to communicate that, not just to ourselves but to the organization, I moved out of the office that has always been the executive director's office.
Okay.
I moved out of that office and I moved into another office. I ironically moved into the office that I had begun at when I came to this organization 15 years ago as associate director.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that was helpful. That was helpful for me in a lot of ways, that I left the director's office and I went back to the office that I had been in before, back to that place.
That's powerful in communicating the culture, because where your office is in organizational development, they call those the artifacts.
Oh yeah.
The culture. And so when you intentionally stepped out of that office, moved your stuff to space, that communicated something to you and to the organization, and it that's powerful demonstration. I bet when you don't walk in, some mornings you probably walk in and head to the old office, and then you say, wait a minute, I'm not there anymore.
It's interesting that you raised that, because I don't remember whenever after moving, we made the move on a Friday. Seems like I don't remember if I came back on Monday or if there was a week there that I didn't come back. Okay. But no, whenever I walked in the office, I did not feel a pull to go to that old office.
You didn't do it out of habit?
No, it was, I went to the new one, to the new old office, and I was ready for that. I have experienced that the time since, as I walk into the director's office, there is this thing that goes over me of, it's kind of like, man, there's a lot of stuff that needs to get done in this office, and I'm glad it doesn't belong to me. So I walk in, I sit down in my chair, I participate in the meeting, that whatever it is, and then I look forward to walking out of there without any tasks going with me. So, so it's, so yeah. So I also, I would have to say to you too, you asked what surprised me.
Yeah.
Um, I guess I was surprised at how little I had to do. That once I left that position, and there were some leftover tasks that I needed to take care of, but I did reach a point of sitting down, like in the evening. It was too much of an old habit of mine that I would finish my clinical notes or send emails or whatever, watching ball games, in the living room or whatever. And it was interesting to me how I would go, the evening would come, my wife and I would have dinner, and then I would go sit there and, so what am I supposed to do in addition to watch the ball game now? so, so I can play a game on my iPad now or whatever. So it was a piece of, I don't know that I was totally prepared for having less to do.
Okay.
And I also know that it did take some time, though I knew it was important to do, it did take some time to also adjust to the fact that I had more personal time in my schedule, and and my role had changed, and I did not need to be involved in all of those things of the organization. I was ready for it. I was ready to be there, but there was still that uncomfortableness or whatever, whenever the reality of that hit. I decreased my hours. I went away. I was out of town, just went away for 2 months. Did not come back in that office and show my face for 2 months. There was 2 days in those 2 months where some of my critical clients needed to be seen, but I saw them at one of our satellite locations, not at the main office, because I thought it was important to get away.
Yeah. And let me kind of sidetrack for just a second. You mentioned 2 months. For your average parish pastor, if they're retiring and they're living in the area, is there a generic time frame that you would recommend that they take a break away once the new person comes, or is it on a case-by-case basis?
I think that needs to be at least a year.
Yeah.
The difference in my situation and parishes is I'm not involved. I'm involved in seeing clients. I'm not involved in going to board of directors meetings. I did not go to staff meetings for at least 6 months. And when I came back, I only came back because the director said, Rick, you're part-time on our staff and we need you in the staff meetings. And but I rarely spoke at staff meetings because I didn't want to be in that influential piece. And I think there's a difference somewhat in that and an organization of a counseling center and a congregation. So sure. It wasn't about influencing people and being seen and chit chat and all of that and distract from the ministry and everything. So yeah. So
yeah, and I think for pastors, the year is good advice, because then it gives the new person to be the lead in worship and up front through a cycle of Thanksgiving, Advent, Christmas, Lent, Easter, without the other person present. And that just makes sense, so that they would establish themselves, get on their feet and so forth. Is that part of the year that you come up with?
I think so. Yeah. And I think the other piece of that, as we mentioned a while ago, some of that change is about the ego. And I think it's real important for the year, because the leaving pastor needs to find their new identity. And they need to realize that when they walk back in there, some people are going to refer to them as pastor, But I really believe it's important for them to walk back in as Rick or as Scott or as whoever,
Hmm.
and not as pastor.
Yeah.
And so yeah.
Well, what were some of the things that helped you get there and make that transition? And I imagine there's still little bits that are still you're working through, but what were some things that really helped you get there?
I think number one, having left a couple of congregations along the way in my 25 years of parish ministry, that there were some things that as I looked back on my leaving that I had learned were important and needed to be continued, or I didn't do and I should do. That was number one. That helped me. I guess in my role of doing consulting with congregations and all, I have also seen organizations where the pastor doesn't leave, or where the transition doesn't take place in that way,
Hmm.
or where everything is not shared as it should have been shared, or where there isn't communication about that leaving up front, and just seeing how how problematic that has been for those organizations and for those individuals as they have attempted to transition and let go and all. Um, seeing the hurt and the pain that pastors have experienced in one congregation, and they move to another congregation and they haven't resolved that hurt and pain, and they walk in leery of similar incidences in the new congregation, and
Hmm.
how important it is to be able to find ways to resolve and forgive and let go of what goes on there, so that you're ready to move on in the new and maybe have learned some things. So
Yeah.
that was particularly in the whole piece of retirement. A couple of books. One book that was most helpful to me was a book entitled Vesper Time. Vesper, like the Vesper evening worship service, Vesper Time.
Yeah.
And this author did a good job, I think, of really talking about what is it like as you move into this new season of your life, called older adult, or called retirement, or called aged, or whatever, and some pieces that are important to deal with in there. I remember him spending a good amount of time of dealing with the whole issue of feeling diminished,
Mm.
that if your life and your value depended upon your leadership position in congregations and organizations, and now you do not and are you diminished? Do you have less value? And his real encouragement in all of no, you still have value. It's finding what that value is, and that no matter what season in life, it's important that we have a purpose, and it's important that we're living out our purpose and value that God has given to us and has redeemed us in, and that maybe I'm diminished in the eyes of an organization, but they don't have the power to define me being diminished.
Yeah.
That it's my God who attaches my value and all. So that was really helpful, because I know that there were times of feeling that way. He also had a whole section that was most helpful for me too, and talked about how important it's going to be that you turn off the voices. The chatter is what he used. You got to turn off the chatter that goes on in your head when you've led an organization or organizations for 40 years. There's that chatter that's always going on about what's the next program, what's this email that I've got to follow up to, where are we going to get the money for the next payroll, what's the next worship services to plan, what might that look like? Oh, yeah, and it's the chatter that's just always going on, and how you're going to have to calm down that chatter. And in some ways, though, you're going to have to redirect the chatter,
Hmm.
and learning the value of redirecting the chatter to not about an organization any longer, but about yourself, and about your family, and about your marriage, and about places and volunteer opportunities or whatever you want to be involved in.
Mhm.
That's where the chatter becomes, and that was a really helpful piece to be reminded of. And he also talked in terms of, and we've talked about it here, the transitional nature, that you don't go from an ending to a new beginning, that there is this wandering in the wilderness that takes place as we find our new normal and the promised land that God has in mind for us. So those were helpful pieces from that, and so
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, that's rich. That's rich.
yeah.
So as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking intentionality, time to reflect,
Mm-hmm.
uh, do that deeply. There might be resources to help, uh, books out there like Vesper Time, or even people that you can reflect with,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then being real upfront about it and honest with yourself as well. Yeah.
I'm working through a book right now. I shouldn't have brought this up because now I can't remember the author's name, but the book is Restoration Year,
Okay.
and um, I can't grab the name. Eddington. Anyway, but he does a real good job. I'm enjoying it because he takes different facets and kind of challenges of primarily around our own ego and around our own value and around purpose in life and who's God called you to be and where has he called you to let go. Yesterday's reading was real good. It talked about letting go of the doings. That whole piece where we get caught up in my doing and my accomplishments equal my value.
Oh,
And him talking in terms of letting go of the doings and rest yourself in the arms of God's grace.
yeah.
And says, so what are the doings that you're hanging on to for your value?
Hmm.
And it just, it was a good piece to just, and I've gotten into, somebody gave me a couple of years ago, a leather bound book to do journaling in, and I've for years and years have journaled on my iPad, and so I took the challenge this year, and I'm writing my journaling now, and it has been helpful to dig a way to dig a little deeper and all. So
Good.
finding those new ways I think are important too. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, is there anything else as we wrap up for today?
you had also mentioned what has comforted me
Yeah.
in the leaving and the transitioning. I think what has comforted me has been there is a comfort that the organization and ministry that I was part of, and each time along the way, that those continued, and it was important as they continued for me to see where it was important for me to be there, but also to see where it's important that I'm not there now and that they have moved on with new gifts and talents and leadership and everything. So that's been comforting. It's been comforting to see, new ways, looks, ideas that I could not have brought, and that the leaving was good in that way. In my particular case right now in this organization that I've been part of, it's been comforting to see that the board of directors has embraced the change and has embraced the new director. And I think that there's times that our ego can say, well, I wish they would struggle with him for a little while. But I think it's really important that they just completely embraced the new director. And I think that's real good and very important for organizations, which is what that's supposed to be about. And releases me then to go and do what's important for this phase of my life. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Good stuff. Well, how can people get in touch with you if they want to talk about it further or more confidentially? Are you still in that kind of business? I think you are.
Oh, yeah, I am. Probably the best way to do that is by my email address. Send me an email, Armstrong at lcsfl.org. LCSLutheranCounselingServices.com. LCS Lutheran Counseling Services, FL for Florida.com. And
lcsfl.com. R. Armstrong at.
yeah,
Got it.
yeah.
Wonderful. Hey, thanks so much for the time.
Thank you. Good talking with you again, and hope this is helpful for folks. And I pray for people in their transitions as they work through those that wilderness and finding the new direction God has for them. Blessings.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate you.